Hi there. I am Sam from 360Works. I'm here to show you a new tool we've developed called fmPromise that makes developing web-based add-ons for FileMaker a lot easier. As you may know, FileMaker 19 added two-way communication between FileMaker and JavaScript running in a web viewer. And this opens up a whole lot of possibilities. So FileMaker buttons can call JavaScript in your web viewer, which updates the web page. And your page's JavaScript can also call FileMaker scripts when the user clicks a button or accesses an external API. However, there are a few ways this could be made easier. We've written a tool to improve the two-way communication from JavaScript to FileMaker, as well as to provide a streamlined way to deploy web-based modules in your FileMaker solutions. So let's talk about deploying first. You've got a web viewer which needs some HTML content. Where should you store this HTML? You could serve it from a remote machine, but you have offline users or spotty connectivity. That's problematic. So storing it in a FileMaker field solves these problems. Here's a simple HTML page stored in a FileMaker text field. And here's a web viewer, which is rendering that using this calculation, which just shows the HTML. And you can see if we change the HTML, our web viewer updates. So that's great. And let's try to make our world bold. So we put a strong tag around it, but unfortunately it has broken because there's a smart quote in there. So let's fix the quotes with regular quotes and have our bold world perform a script when you click on it. So when we click on the tag, we're going to call a FileMaker script called myToggleScript. And I'll show you the script in question. This is the myToggleScript, and it toggles the toolbars, and then it exits with a result of OK. So if we try that out, we'll see that we are toggling our toolbar via web viewer. So far so good. What this illustrates is, though, unless you enjoy editing HTML within a FileMaker text field, you're going to want to store your HTML in a file and use an HTML-savvy tool like WebStorm or IntelliJ for editing, and that'll catch the quote issues and many, many others. Then you make your edits and you want to see how they look in FileMaker. You would need to copy your file into here and reload the web viewer, and it all gets fairly tedious. Especially when you have external style sheets and JavaScript files. So fmPromise development cycle solves these problems by having two modes, development and production. And during development, your web viewer content comes from an HTML file on your hard drive. During production, and then when you're happy with how that looks, you bundle that HTML into a FileMaker field along with any external dependencies, JavaScript, CSS, and then you deploy your solution in production mode. Your web viewer content is served from that field since your users don't have access to your local files. So I'll show you an example. I've got the fmPromise add-on installed in my FileMaker extensions folder, which is here, and I've restarted FileMaker, and what that lets us do is go to layout mode and add the fmPromise add-on to our solution, which you see is here. Then we can make a new layout. Let's call this Hello World. And we'll drag our module out. All right, and incidentally, when we install the fmPromise module, that creates two tables and two layouts and 4 scripts that are in a script folder, as well as a few custom functions. I'll go into the details of that later, but so we've added our add-on, and then we're prompted for a file name that we want to display in our web viewer. So I'll do hello world, click continue, and that's created a hello world file here in my home directory fmPromise directory. This is a symbolic link, so it's actually documents fmPromise example, which is the name of our file, and then we've got our hello world file, as well as a few others that I was working on earlier. And so now we've added our module. It's there. You can edit the document and then click the refresh button here to see changes. Once we're done editing, we would package that document into our database, into the FM folder, fmPromise module table, and then it's ready to deploy. And now we'll see dev mode is on, so the web viewer content is being served from the local files. It's very important to remember to package it and try it out with dev mode off once you're ready to deploy your changes. But let's look at this hello world file in IntelliJ, which is a very nice HTML editor. So we've got some boilerplate, simple HTML document. We have a link to a simple CSS file. This is the CSS that comes bundled. It just sets the document height to 100 and has some fonts that don't look quite so out of place on a FileMaker layout. Then we've got an fmPromise JavaScript file. I'll get into that more later, but it's optional. You could just take this out. And then here's our boilerplate, which is just the HTML for what we see here with some instructions. So we can take this out and replace it with something that looks more like what our example was. So I left the CSS and the fmPromise, but our body is still just a simple hello world with an on-click on the world. If we go back to FileMaker and refresh, we see that's there. We see our toggle is still working. And so if we're happy with that, we would package this. And we'll see that in the module table, we now have a new record, and the title, the name of this is Hello World HTML. And we've got our source code here, which is what is in the file, and we've also got a minified version. And what's just interesting here is we've inlined that CSS file, and we've inlined, here's our CSS, and we've inlined our external scripts. So this is what would get served in a web viewer in our deployed version. You can preview the content here, and that still works. And also you can see all the layouts where this is used. So it's used on the Hello World layout. It was added at this time by this user. So let's try making changes and see how that works. Oh, if I toggle dev mode off, now this is served from the field instead of the file. Looks the same. We'll toggle dev mode back on, and we'll make some changes. I think we can make this a bit more exciting. We'll snazz it up. So what I'm going to do is add a link to a custom cursor JavaScript from this external source. And at the bottom of the body tag, I will just instantiate the custom cursor. So I'm going to save this, go back here, we'll refresh. Looks the same until you mouse over it, and then you have bubble cursors. So I know everyone's going to want this on every layout. And again, if we package this, we will see that our minified code now has, in addition to the fmPromise, it has all of our bubble cursor JavaScript code. And that covers the deployment aspect of fmPromise. It's a very easy way to do iterative development until you get something you like, and then very easily drop it into a field, and then turn off dev mode, and this is ready to distribute to your overjoyed users. As a note, if you would prefer to leave the script as external resources, you can do that by adding a custom attribute to the script tag, and that's in the documentation. Now let's take a whirlwind tour of the fmPromise JavaScript library that's linked to in this file. So we've got our cursor, and then fmPromise has all this code in it, and it's not actually that much. Most of it is documents, documentation, comments. I'm not going to go into every detail of this because there's a lot there, and it can get fairly heavy into JavaScript. But at a high level, the fmPromise library allows you to call scripts in FileMaker and get a return value for the script that you call. This is a big deal if you want your web viewer to change data that lives in FileMaker and you want to implement error checking, or if you want to fetch data dynamically in a web viewer using things like custom scripts or the data API or execute SQL, and you want to get that data back and display it in a web view, possibly in a SVG report or a data table or a custom widget or something like that. So this makes it really easy to do that without doing sort of find and replace in FileMaker. So it's probably easiest to illustrate how this works by opening the JavaScript console in the web viewer. All right, and in the instructions on fmPromise, there's a command you can run from your terminal that lets you get to the developer tools. It's pretty much essential if you're working with a web viewer in FileMaker, because otherwise it's impossible to see any errors that happen. So we've got our console open. Here's our hello world with the fancy cursor, and if we type in fmPromise in the console, we can see this is our fmPromise object. And these are all the functions in the fmPromise object. The underscore ones are private. We've got some evaluate. Let's just try these out. So if I call fmPromise.evaluate, get username, we see that we performed a script and we got a promise back. So what's a promise? That's not very useful. It doesn't have our username. A promise in JavaScript is really a holder for a value that may not have actually been calculated yet, and in fact it could fail to evaluate and generate an error. But it could take 1 millisecond. It could take 15 seconds. It's asynchronous, and generally you pass a callback in a JavaScript sort of function to a promise and say, hey, when you're done, call this function with whatever result you get. So we can show that here. Then we call then on our promise that gets returned, and we pass in a function that gets a string, and it's going to just log that string. All right, there we go. So this is neat. We can execute the calculation engine from our JavaScript and get a promise that returns the result. So what if we try an invalid calculation? We'll just put an X, which is not a valid calculation. If we get an actual JavaScript exception with an error code 1215. If we try something like 0 divided by 0, we get an error that we can't divide by 0. So then if we want to handle these errors, in addition to calling then, which gets fired if we get a successful result, we can call catch, which gets the error. And we'll log that to the console, and we'll see that we get an error object, which is, has a message, has a code, and has the name of the script that did the thing. We can also, what else is in fmPromise? We've got execute SQL. So we could say, for instance, getting in the metadata, select table name from FileMaker tables, then we get our result, we'll log it. So these are all of the table names that we got via execute SQL. And execute SQL and fmPromise actually returns an array of arrays, which is a lot handier than just a single string. We parse that out for you. And one other sort of syntactic sugar that JavaScript has is the async and await keywords. So generally, when you have a promise, I would say 95% of the time, what you want to do is stop doing anything until the promise finishes, and then do something with the result of that promise. And you can do that using the callbacks, but it gets a little convoluted and a little hard to read. So what JavaScript introduced is the await keyword. And you can only use an await keyword inside of an async function that's labeled async. In the console, everything is async, so we'll do fmPromise dot execute FileMaker data API. So here's another function that's built into fmPromise. We'll pass in layouts. Let's see, actually, simple web viewer is one of my layouts. And we get a whole data API object back using the await keyword. We've got our data, which has the field data with the HTML. We've got our metadata about how many records were fetched. So using the await keyword in code makes it really easy to tightly integrate your webbers and your FileMaker data with really good readability. I'd recommend using that. It's available in modern browsers, not in IE. Incidentally, caveat, fmPromise doesn't work on Windows. So once FileMaker upgrades the web engine to no longer be sort of primitive, hint hint, it'll work fine on Windows also. But it's at the moment it's a Mac only tool. And let's show fmPromise calling a script. fmPromise perform script. My toggle script. We'll put an await in there. It's always that's actually the easiest way to mess up fmPromise is to forget to use the await, or forget that it's returning a promise that you need to actually get the value of. If we do this, we can see that it calls the script, it toggles the toolbar, and we get the OK result. Remember, our my toggle script exits with the result of OK. If we change this to did it, we don't know whether it's open or closed, we just toggled it. And we call that script again, we get the result of did it, and it toggles the script again. So that is fmPromise from the console. I think one more thing is let's try and do something actually useful. So let's do a custom input using fmPromise. I'm going to make a new layout called range input. And what we want is we want to set a number field in FileMaker using a slider. So here's our number field. It's empty. And let's bring a fmPromise web viewer in. Range input. Now I already had a range input file here. It did not, fmPromise did not overwrite it with the template. It's going to use this range input that's already there. But let me show you what's in that file. So again, we've got our boilerplate at the beginning, and then the body is really just an input, an HTML input whose type is range. Its lowest value is 0, its highest value is 100. When we adjust the slider on the range input, we're going to call this JavaScript function. When we let go of the slider, we're going to call this JavaScript function. So the preview, when we're sliding it around, is just going to get our preview value span. It's going to set its inner text to the value that the slider is. When we let go and we call submit, we're going to use fmPromise inside of an async function to set a field by name. And the field that we're setting is number. So let's try it out. We go here, and we can see that the web viewer, we get a preview, but it hasn't written anything until we write it. Now, what if there's an error? If I make a new window and I'm on the same record and I have this record open, it's locked in this other window, which is like another session. And then if I go back here and I try and edit it, well, we get an error from FileMaker. Do we also get a JavaScript error? We do. So record is in use by another user. If we wanted to do that handle that in FileMaker, we would put this in a try catch. So we try to set the field by name. If there's an error, then we say maybe the inner text is going to be just oops, and then the error. If we refresh this, we get our error. The HTML handles it, and we know that we can't continue on with what we were doing in HTML until we close out of this. And then we're back in business. So that is a really handy widget. We can also, the web viewer for this doesn't need to be so big. We can shrink this down and have a more reasonable sized web viewer. Now, if we look at the HTML, we've got sort of hard-coded things in here. It's always going to set the number field, right? And if we wanted to set some other field, we could make a whole other file, HTML file, and just the only difference would be this name, but it would be nice to maybe configure this. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to drag out a new fmPromise module, and let's call it range input configurable. So handily, that's already there. And what we have here, interestingly, is a config form. I'll show you how I wrote this first. So here's our range input configurable. Everything here is the same. We've got our input with the callbacks, and we've got our preview, but we have a config object. And what we have here is an initialization function that runs when the web viewer is loaded. And we're calling await fmPromise configuration. And the fmPromise configuration reads the config data for this specific web viewer if it's there. If it's not, it shows a form asking for you to fill in info about this stuff. So we want three things. We want the name of the field, the minimum value, the maximum value. This should be probably number, but that's not supported yet. When we ask for a field, we can optionally have a filter that only returns decimal field types. If we look over here, we'll see that these are all of our tables. It filters out the fmPromise tables by default, but you can write your own table filter. And then these are all of our fields. If I were to take out this, I'll just return true on this filter and reload it. You see all the fields. But we'll switch that back. I'm going to take a quick diversion and show you the actual fmPromise module table. So when you install the add-on, this gets created. And we've got a record here. Each record in the fmPromise module is either a JavaScript file or an HTML file that you've written, or an HTML file that's built in. If we look at the last one, we've got our range input HTML. And right now the source is empty because we haven't packaged this yet, so there's nothing here. Then at the, but we do have the instance, it knows that it's on this layout. If we look at the web viewer, every time you drag a fmPromise module to a web viewer, to a layout, it creates a record here. So you could, this is saying the hello world module is used here, and then the range input configurable is on this layout, but there's no configuration. Let's go back to our range input. All right, our range input layout. So we've got our configuration, and then we can set which number we want to set. And we can have a minimum value and a maximum value. So we want to set the number. The minimum is going to be 10 to 100. And we save this. And so you can see the range on this one is higher than this one. This one is, or rather, they're two separate things. When we refresh this, also in the initialization function, we are getting the value of the field. So that happens here. Basically, we get the config object, and then the config is going to have a field and a min and max. We can, and the await function means that that whole configuration process returns a promise. Our code does not proceed past that configuration step until you've submitted the configuration data. If we look in the web viewer table, here's our config. So the field is fmPromise example number, the minimum is 10, the maximum is 100. Then we get back to here. We evaluate it to get the value of that field. We get the input, and we set the value on the HTML input. We set the minimum, we set the maximum, and then we update our little preview div. So that is that. If we want to edit the configuration, right now the only way to really do that is to go here and either delete the web viewer from your layout or just clear this configuration out. Then when we go back to range input, we've got our form is visible again. But I can't resist doing something utterly useless again, so I just want to show you that if you have a wide enough layout, you can use this for phone inputs. There we go. You can't really get very accurate, but you get the right area code sometimes. And if we put our phone number field, you can see that's what's being set. This should probably be a text field. So that is that's the high-level sort of tour of fmPromise. It's a free tool right now. We're still actively developing it, so I'm really curious to see what you come up with. head to 360works.com/fmPromise, and you can get a build of it there from our store for free, and let us know what you think. So again, thank you.